At Joe's diner, Amy Walker had seen her fair share of difficult days. The night shift was always slow, and tonight was no different. As the clock ticked down toward closing time, Amy wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time. Money was tight. Rent was due in a week, and her tips from the few customers she had served barely covered her expenses. As she glanced toward the door, a figure entered that would unknowingly change her life. He was a man weathered by time, his clothes tattered, his boots worn from miles of travel, but his eyes held something far more profound, dignity. He walked up to the counter, his voice rough but polite as he asked what he could get for $5. Amy's heart ached as she scanned the menu. The cheapest meal was more than $5, but something about the look in his eyes made her decision easy. "You're in luck," she said, offering him a warm smile. "We have a special tonight. One full meal for $5. His face lit up with surprise, and for a moment Amy saw a glimmer of hope. As Amy placed his meal before him, the diner's manager, Rick, stormed over. His face twisted with annoyance as he noticed the meal. "What do you think you're doing?" he snapped. But Amy didn't flinch. She stood her ground, explaining calmly that she paid for the meal herself. Rick didn't care. He grabbed the plate and threw it in the trash, his disdain for the man palpable. "We're not a charity," he scoffed. "If you want to feed bums, do it somewhere else." Amy was furious, but it was when Rick fired her that the injustice of it all hit her hardest. She had done the right thing, and now she had lost her job for it. Out of work, with rent looming over her head, Amy walked out into the cold night, uncertain about her next step. What she didn't know, however, was that within 24 hours, her life would take a turn she never saw coming. If you believe in the power of kindness, stick with us. This story is just beginning. Welcome to Acts of Kindness Stories. The events of that night were just the beginning for Amy Walker. The next morning, she found herself walking the streets, hoping for a glimpse of hope, something to pull her out of the dark hole she had been thrown into. After losing her job for doing something right, Amy had no plan. She had no backup, no safety net. All she had was the weight of her decision, and the undeniable truth that she had acted with compassion. She knew she couldn't let it go. But what was she supposed to do now? Her morning started like any other. She scoured the streets for a job, knocking on doors, filling out application after application. Each rejection cut deeper than the last. Every, "we're not hiring right now," left her feeling more invisible, more insignificant. By noon, she was standing in front of Joe's diner once more. She hadn't planned on coming back. She thought it might hurt too much, but something drew her there. Maybe it was the empty feeling in her chest, or maybe she just needed to see the place where everything had fallen apart. It was then that a loud rumble interrupted her thoughts. The ground trembled under the weight of what was coming. She looked down the street, her heart skipping a beat as she saw the convoy approaching. Military jeeps and armored vehicles rolled down the quiet road like a force of nature. The townspeople stopped what they were doing, their eyes widening in surprise. A military convoy in their small town. It was unheard of. Amy's gaze turned back toward the diner, and that's when she saw him. The veteran, Frank, walked past her, but this time he wasn't the same man. His clothes were neatly pressed, his shoulders squared, and his face no longer carried the burden of hopelessness. Instead, it was filled with a quiet confidence. Amy's breath caught in her throat as Frank walked straight into Joe's diner, flanked by a dozen Marines. The air inside the diner grew thick with tension. The door chimed as Frank entered, his presence commanding the room. The entire diner fell silent, and all eyes turned toward him. He wasn't the frail man who had walked in the night before asking for a meal. Today he was dressed in full Marine uniform, decorated with ribbons and medals that spoke volumes about his past. Behind him stood a group of Marines, their boots thudding loudly on the floor, their discipline palpable. Every step they took was deliberate, and the weight of their uniform echoed the sacrifices they had made. Amy's heart raced as she watched them. The man who had been tossed out of the diner yesterday, A man who had faced the harshest of life's challenges was now surrounded by men of honor. They had come to make a statement that no one would ignore. Rick, the manager, stood frozen, staring at Frank, unsure of what was happening. His smug expression faltered. The military officers didn't give him a chance to speak. "We're looking for Amy Walker," one of the officers said. His voice steady, commanding. It was a question, but there was no room for argument in it. Rick hesitated, but before he could respond, the officer continued. "We know she doesn't work here anymore. We know exactly what happened." The officer's gaze never wavered. "It's her we're here for." The room fell silent again as the veteran, Frank, stepped forward. His voice was calm but firm. "Yesterday, a young woman showed me kindness when no one else would. For that, she lost her job." Frank's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Rick's face reddened as he tried to deny what had happened. "I don't know what you mean. I didn't know," he stammered, his voice faltering. But Frank was unrelenting. "Yesterday you humiliated me. But worse, you humiliated Amy," Frank continued, his voice growing stronger. "You don't know the sacrifices I've made, the pain I've endured. And you don't understand the strength it took for Amy to do what she did. She gave me more than food. She gave me dignity." The officer, Colonel Carter, stepped forward then, his voice as sharp as a blade. "We came here today to offer Amy Walker a job. Not as a charity, but because she's earned it." He glanced back at Amy, who had been standing outside, frozen in place. When her eyes met his, something inside her stirred. She stepped inside the diner, her steps uncertain but resolute. The room shifted. All eyes were on her. Rick had no words left. The colonel continued. "Amy, we need people like you, people with compassion, with heart. You've shown us more courage than most could ever understand." The next few moments were surreal. Amy stood at the center of the diner, hearing the words she had never imagined hearing. The Marines weren't offering her pity. They were offering her a future, one she had never dared to dream of. The job they offered wasn't just any job. It was a chance to make a difference in the lives of people who had sacrificed everything. A chance to help veterans like Frank transition back into civilian life, offering them support, counseling, and the opportunity to find hope again. Amy stood in silence, still holding the colonel's business card, her mind spinning. Rick scoffed. "This is ridiculous. You can't just walk in here and offer her a job. She's just a waitress." But the colonel didn't flinch. He turned toward Rick, his voice cold. "You think Amy is just a waitress?" he asked. "She's more than you could ever understand. In one night, she did more for one of our men than you have done in your entire life." Amy's chest tightened as the colonel's words hit her heart. She didn't need Rick's approval. She didn't need anyone's approval. For the first time in a long time, she realized that her actions had meant something. Something real, something important. Rick tried to dismiss the moment, his smug attitude returning. "Those guys will forget about you in a week," he sneered. "It's just a gesture. Nothing more." But Amy wasn't listening. She wasn't the same person who had walked in just a few minutes ago. She had found her strength, her purpose. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her. "I don't need an apology," Amy said quietly, her gaze unwavering. "Because I don't regret what I did. If I had to do it again, I would. And if that means I don't belong here, then so be it." The colonel nodded approvingly. "That's exactly why we want you on our team." With those words, Amy's life shifted. From that moment on, she would never be the same. She had been given an opportunity, a chance to help people who had given so much, a chance to help men like Frank find their place in the world again. And so, Amy left Joe's diner, her heart lighter, her mind clearer. She walked out into the cold night, but this time she wasn't walking aimlessly. She was walking toward something better, something meaningful. She held on to that business card with the same certainty that she had once held her dreams. She wasn't just going to survive anymore. She was going to make a difference. The next day, Amy walked into the Marine Corps facility, the one that would become her new home, both literally and metaphorically. Colonel Carter was waiting for her, and as she stepped inside, she was filled with a new sense of purpose. The program they ran wasn't just about helping veterans. It was about healing, about rebuilding, about finding dignity in a world that had forgotten them. Amy learned quickly. The work was challenging, but it was fulfilling. She helped veterans find jobs, housing, and even more importantly, she offered them the compassion and understanding they so desperately needed. Each day was an opportunity to change someone's life, and with every life she touched, Amy felt her own healing too. Months passed, and Amy's transformation was undeniable. She had found something she had never known before: purpose. She had gone from serving meals at a diner to serving those who had sacrificed so much for their country. And in doing so, she had found herself. And then, one day, as Amy worked tirelessly at the Veteran Transition Center, Frank walked in, looking more confident than ever. He was dressed in his uniform, his posture strong, his eyes filled with the quiet pride of someone who had found his place in the world again. He handed Amy a small folded napkin. "What's this?" Amy asked, unfolding it carefully. It was the receipt from that night at Joe's diner, the night that had changed everything. "I've kept it," Frank said, his voice steady. "Because that was the night I realized I wasn't invisible. That was the night I realized someone cared." Amy's throat tightened. That simple meal had meant everything to him. It had been the turning point in his life, just as it had been in hers. And from that moment forward, they both knew they were part of something bigger, something that would continue to change lives, one act of kindness at a time. Amy had gone from hopeless to hopeful, from helpless to empowered. And it all began with one simple act of kindness: a meal shared with a stranger. Sometimes the smallest gestures have the power to change everything. As Amy stood there, looking down at the worn receipt that had once symbolized her act of kindness, a tear slipped down her cheek. The night she had spent helping Frank had set off a chain of events she couldn't have imagined. What had started as a simple gesture, feeding a hungry man, had turned into a new beginning for both of them. Frank, once lost and forgotten, had found a sense of purpose, and so had Amy. She had gone from working in a diner, barely getting by, to now being part of a mission far bigger than herself. Every day, she worked alongside Frank and countless other veterans, helping them regain what they had lost. Amy had learned that doing the right thing isn't always easy. Sometimes it feels like the world rewards selfishness and cruelty, but in the end, kindness always finds its way back. She had been tested, pushed to the edge, but she never gave up. The Marines who had stepped in to help her showed her that, even in the hardest times, there's always someone out there willing to stand by you. Amy's journey proved that small acts of kindness, no matter how small they seem, can change lives, sometimes in ways we can't even see coming. Frank had saved lives on the battlefield, but it was Amy's kindness that had helped him rebuild his life. And it was her strength, her refusal to back down, that had inspired him and countless others to keep going. Together they were helping other veterans stand tall, reminding them that they mattered, that they were seen, and that they were never truly alone. Amy smiled as she stood by the door, watching the veterans come in and out of the center, each of them on their own journey of recovery, of rediscovery. She had made a real difference, and for the first time in years, she felt like she belonged. If you've ever been in a position where you've had to decide whether to stand up for what's right or to turn away, then you know how powerful a simple act of kindness can be. It doesn't take much. Just a moment of courage to make someone else's life a little bit better. Amy's story is a reminder that no act of kindness is too small, and no gesture goes unnoticed. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a position where your kindness made a difference, or where someone's act of kindness changed your life? Share your story in the comments below, and if this story inspired you, give us a like, share it with your friends, and help spread the message of hope. Don't forget to subscribe to Acts of Kindness Stories. We're on a mission to show the world that kindness is never in vain. Help us reach 10,000 subscribers, and together, let's keep spreading the good. Let's make kindness go viral. Thank you for watching, and remember, it only takes one person to change the world. Will you be that person?